Colombia has seen the highest number of victims of forced displacement this year since the signing of the peace agreement in 2016. Brazil's Congress on Tuesday approved the 2022 budget with a huge amount of funding allocated for the presidential elections, sparking controversy. During his annual end-of-year press conference, Russian President Vladimir Putin noted the ball is in the United States court on Russia's security proposals. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is from the south, I'm Katrina Goss. This year has seen the highest number of victims of forced displacement in Colombia since the signing of the peace agreement in 2016. According to a report by NGO, the Consultancy for Human Rights and Displacement, from January to November 2021, a total of almost 83,000 people were forcibly displaced in Colombia, representing an increase of 169% compared to 2020. There were over 160 events of mass and multiple displacement reported, with the greatest impact on Afro-Colombian and indigenous communities. 5 years after the peace accords were signed in Havana, armed conflict, land disputes, large-scale development projects, violations of human rights and humanitarian law continue, forcing tens of thousands to abandon their homes. The Committee for Dialogue, Reconciliation and Peace of the National Assembly of Venezuela offered an annual report on Wednesday, a year after its installation. Made up of representatives of the main political parties in the country, the Parliamentary Committee was created last year as a space to bring together all social, economic and political sectors in the quest to build stability and peace. According to information provided by the President of the National Assembly, Jorge Rodriguez, the committee plans to include judicial reform as part of the work schedule for the upcoming period, in coordination with the Parliamentary Committee responsible for adapting the Venezuelan justice system, according to proposals from different sectors. The government of Haiti confirmed on Wednesday that it's handed over all the necessary documentation to Turkish authorities for the extradition of businessman Samir Handal, who's suspected of involvement in the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse. The foreign minister noted that the request was made for the suspect's transfer to Haiti, even though there is no extradition treaty between the two countries, and that authorities are working closely on the case. The businessman was apprehended during a layover at Istanbul airport in November, as an Interpol notice had been issued against him. In October, then Haitian Justice Minister Rockefeller Vincent offered a reward of about $40,000 for information on the whereabouts of Handel, who, according to human rights organizations, was escorted to the airport by police officers shortly after the assassination. El Salvador's Legislative Assembly approved the General Law on Water Resources drafted by the executive, denounced by social movements for privatizing the country's water system. Civil society organizations that have been leading the struggle for a water law for more than a decade have criticized the legislation. Although the law recognizes access to water as a human right, social and environmental organizations argue that it legalizes corporate commodification of water resources over human needs. Having fended off a number of privatization schemes over the past 15 years, they stress it contains dangerous provisions that would allow corporations to control and damage the country's fragile water resources. The Argentine government paid tribute to the victims of the violent state repression of December 19th and 20th, 2001, which resulted in the deaths of 39 people. We have more details in the following report by our correspondent, Carolina Silvestre.
During the ceremony held at the Casa Rosada, President Alberto Fernández made it clear the state is there to guarantee rights, not to repress protests.
Cuando ese pueblo se vino a esta plaza, que es una plaza histórica, donde el pueblo suele venir a expresarse, se encontraron.
When the people came to this square, which is a historic square where people usually come to spread themselves, they were met with horses, with gendarmes, with rubber bullets and lead bullets that took the lives of many Argentine men and women, here and in many parts of the country. We Argentines were in a really bad situation, and we marched to complain, and many of those who went out to complain lost their lives that day because of the brutality of the state, to provide an answer, and because of something that must be banished once and for all, which is what we call institutional violence.
Por la incapacidad del Estado de dar respuesta y por algo que hay que desterrar de una vez y para siempre, que es eso que llamamos violencia institucional.
With the reparation law for the victims' families and other measures, the national government is taking responsibilities for the first time.
La justicia en este caso tardó en llegar 20 años. y la verdad llegó mínimamente.
Justice in this case to 20 years, and it was minimal, because none of those convicted were sentenced for the murders committed. Those convicted were charged with felonies, or would they say minor offenses. It took 20 years because those who had to decide the verdict knew that this square was going to be full of people demanding justice, and they wanted to silence those voices.
Reclamando justicia. Y quisieron acallar esas voces.
The president was accompanied by the families of the victims of December 19th and 20 in 2001, human rights organizations and officials of his administration.
Hay muchos policías.
Many police officers, members of the security forces, who were not identified, were not investigated, and unfortunately there was a cover-up by those entrenched parties that will now carry out a witch hunt, and the incidents, both on the 19th and the 20th, became one of the greatest acts of institutional violence in our democracy.
Hechos de violencia institucional más grande en nuestra democracia.
According to the Secretary for Human Rights of Argentina, Horacio Piedregala, there was a systematic plan to impose a neoliberalism through blood and fire.
Lamentablemente la democracia.
Unfortunately, our democracy was not strong enough to condemn crimes against humanity, and we understand this as being caused by a very strong link with impunity that still prevails. And we have talked about this with many of the relatives, of how many members of these forces that act in the repression have been fundamental actors during the dictatorship, and that due to the lack of justice in our country, we unfortunately had to endure the cost of having this individual crossing path with citizens who were protesting for a different country that was already overwhelmed with problems.
Que sufrir el costo de que estos sujetos se crucen con ciudadanos y ciudadanas que estaban protestando por un país distinto que ya agobiaba.
A commemorative plaque to be placed against the railings of the Casa Rosada in front of the Plaza de Mayo bears the names and surnames of the 39 victims who lost their lives during the days of protest.
Carolina Silvestre, teleSUR, Buenos Aires.
And we'll be right back after this very short break. Don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Brazil's Congress on Tuesday approved the 2022 budget, sending it to be signed off by President Jair Bolsonaro. The lower house passed the bill earlier on Tuesday before it was ratified by the Senate. It foresees $853 million in electoral funding ahead of next year's presidential vote, which has sparked controversy. Polls suggest Bolsonaro faces an uphill battle to be re-elected, with voters angry at his handling of the pandemic and the economy. Opposition forces have also noted that the inclusion of a revitalised social programme to distribute subsidies to the most impoverished sectors of the population is a bid by Bolsonaro to secure support in an election year and will not really address pressing needs. The World Health Organization warned on Wednesday that the rush in wealthy countries to roll out booster doses of COVID vaccines is deepening the inequality in access to jabs and prolonging the pandemic. Many vulnerable people in poorer nations have been left without a single jab, as richer countries not only have vaccinated most of their populations, but are now rolling out broad booster programs in the face of new variants. The moves show that little has been learned over the past 2 years, as unless vaccination is accessible to all, the pandemic will continue and new strains of the virus will continue to emerge as it mutates. The latest variant to be identified, Omicron, is spreading at unprecedented speed and has already been detected in over 100 countries, according to the WHO. Early data indicates that the heavily mutated variant is not only more transmissible than previous strains, but could be better at dodging some vaccine protections, although additional doses appear to push protection levels higher.
SAGE concluded that the focus of immunization must remain on decreasing deaths and severe disease, and expressed concern that blanket booster programs will exacerbate vaccine inequity. About 20% of all vaccine doses administered every day are currently being given as boosters or additional doses. Blanket booster programs are likely to prolong the pandemic rather than ending it. by diverting supply to countries that already have high levels of vaccination coverage, giving the virus more opportunity to spread and mutate.
So vaccine equity and getting the vaccines to those who need them most in all countries must be a priority for every single government, not just some. We need to also be able to use tools to drive transmission down, because if we don't, we will continue to see the virus change and the virus threaten us in ways that will bring us closer to the beginning rather than closer to the end.
Nigeria has been forced to destroy more than 1 million expired COVID-19 vaccines as donors sent doses that were near expiry. The expired doses of the AstraZeneca shots were destroyed on Wednesday in Nigeria's capital Abuja, a week after the nation said it will no longer accept donated COVID-19 vaccines with short shelf lives. The head of Nigeria's National Primary Healthcare Development Agency said the country was put in a difficult situation by developed countries who had procured these vaccines and hoarded them and only offered them for donation when they were about to expire. Many Western nations have also destroyed huge amounts of vaccines rather than donating them to countries in need.
Vaccines were offered to us. We knew that they had a short shelf life, but we were living in an environment where the supply of COVID-19 vaccines were very scarce. They were not available due to vaccine nationalism. We had developed countries that procured these vaccines and hoarded them in their stores. At the point that they were about to expire, they were offered for donation.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. During his annual end-of-year press conference, Russian President Vladimir Putin noted that the ball is in the United States court on Russia's security proposals. Putin said that Washington's reaction and willingness to discuss the security proposals aimed at curbing NATO's eastward expansion was positive, a day after his foreign minister announced talks on the proposals were expected to start in January. Russia proposed a new security deal with NATO in the face of its military encirclement of the country, as well as the possibility of a Western-backed escalation of the conflict in neighboring Ukraine. Washington responded that it's willing to discuss the security proposals, but disagrees with part of them and insists European allies must be part of the talks.
I'd like to emphasize that in general, we have so far seen no positive reactions. US partners told us that they are ready to begin this discussion. This started at the very start of next year in Geneva.
China is set to power the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics and Paralympics with 100% green and renewable energy. This will be the first time that all venues in any Olympic Games will be wholly powered by green energy. The feat is made possible by a flexible, direct current power grid, transmitting electricity produced by the plentiful wind and solar power generation capacity in Zhangjiakou, the 2022 Games co-host city, located 240 kilometers northwest of the Chinese capital. State Grid Corporation of China said it's also promoting green travel between the venues, providing a model for large-scale events in the future.
When the Winter Olympic Games begin in Beijing, all 12 competition venues will be powered by green and renewable energy for the first time in the world. Snowmaking, we will use methods like multiple water storage, water recycling, and scientific and technological water saving. They will not only meet the needs of snowmaking water for the Winter Olympics, but also not cause negative impacts on local water safety and ecological environment. We will continue to vigorously implement the concept of green, sharing, openness and integrity, and run a simple, safe and wonderful Olympic Games.
Iran launched 5 days of large-scale military exercises on Monday in a bid to raise the level of preparedness of the Iranian armed forces in the event of any possible foreign aggression. Our correspondent Hisham Wanas has the details.
The exercises, which are taking place in the Strait of Hormuz and along the coast of 3 southern provinces of Iran, are expected to last 5 days, until December 25th, with the presence of units of the land, naval and aerospace forces of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Tehran assures that the message of this exercise is to defend and protect national security, as well as the peace, friendship and comfort of its neighbors. Iran has the military capability to protect its national interests, its security and the security of the neighbors in the Persian Gulf, so the Iranian authorities want to show its neighbors through these drills that there is no need for foreign military presence in the area, especially that of the United States, and the country of the region are solely responsible for the ensuring their security. The exercises were anticipated by a maneuver carried out by the Iranian armed forces over the Bushehr nuclear power plant in southern Iran as part of preparation to boost the country's air defense capabilities, a drill to test the Persian country's anti-aircraft defense, especially after recent threats by the Israeli occupation force to carry out possible airstrikes against Iran's nuclear facilities. Israel does not have the military capability to carry out a military attack against the Iranian nuclear program and its various facilities, because even though it has the support of the United States, I don't believe that it will proceed to commit such an adventurous move since, given the great dissuasive capacity of the Iranian armed forces, any Israeli attack will have serious repercussions for the Israeli entity. Iran reaffirms that it is not seeking war with any country, but wants that it will respond to the slightest intention of undermining its national security. To this end, Tehran says is preparing its armed forces to protect its nuclear plants, operating for peaceful purposes, while seeking through the Vienna negotiations to revive the nuclear pact on the basis of a full and effective lifting of US sanctions.
And we've come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.